History is full of strange coincidences, but what if the coincidences were not so random after all? What if, spread across centuries and continents, three monks, isolated in their own worlds, predicted the exact same event, each at a different point in time? How could they, with no knowledge of each other, create such a precise overlap? It seems impossible, yet the evidence is undeniable. In the 12th century, a monk in Italy, a hermit in Ireland, and another in the Byzantine Empire all foretold a period of great transition, set to unfold somewhere between 2025 and 2027. There's no easy explanation, no rational answer to explain how these isolated figures, separated by vast distances of time and space, came to the same chilling conclusion. What did they know that we don't? What are the strange elements of their visions that connect so seamlessly with our present reality? They wrote these prophecies down, hidden knowledge preserved in ancient manuscripts bound by ink and parchment. For centuries, these predictions were dismissed as mere superstition, myths whispered through the halls of medieval monasteries. But what if they were right? What if we are now living in the exact moment they foresaw? Lock the door, dim the lights, and settle in. You're about to embark on a journey into forbidden knowledge. This is not just a tale of medieval mysticism. This is a warning. The predictions of Joachim of Fiore, Malachi of Armagh, and Cosmas of Zeno are more than just historical curiosities. They speak directly to us, now, today. By the end of this story, you will see the connections, the patterns hidden in the past that have quietly shaped the present. You will understand why the next few years, between 2025 and 2027, could bring about an event unlike anything we've ever seen before. But here's the question you must consider. What will you do when the time finally comes? The monks foresaw it. Do you see it now? The three men could not have been more different, and that is precisely what makes this story so disturbing. The first lived in the sun-bleached hills of southern Italy. Joachim of Fiore, born around 1135, was not a wild-eyed mystic, but a respected theologian. Popes consulted him. Kings listened. He spent his nights in a stone monastery where candle smoke clung to the ceiling and the air smelled of ink, wax, and damp parchment. Joachim believed history itself followed a divine rhythm, ages unfolding like chapters written by God, and according to his calculations, one chapter was about to end. Far to the northwest, amid cold rain and peat bogs, lived Malachi of Armagh. Unlike Joachim, Malachi was a reformer, a churchman constantly traveling between Rome and Ireland. He slept in drafty abbeys, rode on muddy roads, and witnessed corruption at the very heart of the church. It was during one such visit to Rome, according to later accounts, that he recorded a list unlike anything seen before, a precise sequence of popes, each reduced to a cryptic Latin motto, ending with a final figure and a time of great trial. And then there's the third, least known, most unsettling. Cosmas of Zeno lived alone in the eastern reaches of the Byzantine world, sometime in the 14th century. No court, no patrons, just stone, wind, and silence. His writings were never meant for public eyes. They read like warnings scratched out in isolation, visions of a world cracking, an empire of faith trembling, and a narrow window of years when everything would change. These men never met. There's no evidence they ever read one another's work. Different languages, different centuries, different fears. And yet, when you place their words side by side, When you align dates, symbols, and phrases, you begin to see it. The same narrowing of time. The same sense of an ending disguised as a transformation. The same quiet insistence. Prepare. You're still in the present. But from here on, the past begins leaning toward you. What survives of their prophecies is fragile. Not ideas, but objects. Calfskin pages warped by humidity. Ink faded to the color of dried blood. Margins gnawed by time and insects. These are not clean texts meant for modern eyes. They resist you, and that resistance matters. Joachim's writings exist today as scattered volumes, copied and recopied by monks who feared them as much as they revered them. When I first examined reproductions of his diagrams, circles within circles, ages folding into one another, I noticed something most summaries omit. Dates scratched, erased, rewritten, as if even medieval scribes hesitated to leave certain numbers too visible. One phrase appears repeatedly in the Latin, transitus magnus, the great passage, not the end, a crossing. Malachi's text is even stranger. His list of papal mottos fits on just a few pages. No commentary, no explanation, almost no verbs. It reads like something dictated in haste. The original manuscript is lost, but early copies show careful preservation, except for one section, near the end, where the handwriting changes. Thicker strokes, darker ink. Scholars argue about forgery. But that argument quietly avoids the uncomfortable detail. The final entries are the only ones that mention suffering, collapse, and a narrowing of time. And then there is Cosmas. His manuscript does not survive as a single book at all, but as fragments bound into later theological collections, warnings hidden inside sermons, visions disguised as allegory. In one passage, the parchment is visibly scorched at the edges as if it survived a fire. He describes years that shorten, not in length, but in meaning. Seasons losing order, authority dissolving into noise. He does not name dates directly, but he leaves numeric anchors, cycles, eclipses, generations counted from a fallen city. When these texts are translated independently, they feel vague, symbolic, safe. But when you overlay them, line by line, number by number, the vagueness collapses. The same compressed window, the same language of transition, the same unsettling calm. These manuscripts were never meant to shout. They were meant to wait. And they have been waiting for you. Joachim wrote as if time itself were a living creature, breathing, aging, preparing to shed its skin. In his stone monastery in Calabria, surrounded by olive groves and the constant rasp of cicadas, he developed a radical idea for the 12th century. History was not random, nor merely linear. It unfolded in 3 great ages: the age of the Father, the age of the Son, and then, quietly, almost reluctantly, the age of the Spirit. Joachim believed the first 2 were already complete. The third had not yet arrived, but it was close. What makes Joachim unsettling is not that he spoke of an ending. Many medieval thinkers did. It's that he spoke of a transformation that would feel like collapse. In his commentaries on the Book of Revelation, he describes institutions losing authority overnight, sacred hierarchies dissolving, and a brief, violent purification before renewal. He gives no fiery apocalypse, no final trumpet, just pressure, compression, a narrowing corridor of time. And then there are the numbers. Joachim calculated history using generations, not years, 42 symbolic steps derived from biblical patterns. When later scholars reconstructed his timeline, aligning his generational counts with known historical anchors, the end of the Second Age does not fall in the distant medieval future. It falls unnervingly close to our own, mid-21st century, a window that opens and closes between roughly 2025 and 2027. You won't find that in popular summaries. It sits buried in footnotes, in dismissed diagrams, in margins few people bother to read. Some historians argue this is coincidence. Others say Joachim never intended precision. But then, why revise the diagrams? Why soften the dates? Why did church authorities quietly condemn his followers decades after his death? Joachim insisted the coming transition would feel disorienting rather than glorious. Old truths would stop working. New ones would not yet make sense. Many will believe they are standing at the end, he wrote, but they will instead be standing in the doorway. Read that slowly. A doorway is not an end. It is a passage, and passages are narrow. You're not meant to be comfortable here. Joachim never promised comfort, only inevitability. If Joachim hinted at the rhythm of history, Malachi of Armagh did something far more dangerous. He counted. Malachi was not prone to abstract visions. He was practical, restless, constantly moving between rain-soaked Irish monasteries and the suffocating marble corridors of Rome. He saw power up close. He saw decay. And during a visit to the Vatican in 1139, something happened that his biographers never fully explain. After days spent alone in prayer near the tombs of the apostles, Malachi allegedly wrote a list, just 112 short Latin phrases, no dates, no commentary, only symbols. Each phrase corresponded to a future pope. For centuries, scholars dismissed the list as clever hindsight, until the pattern refused to break. One by one, the mottos matched. Ex Castro Tiberis, Pastor Angelicus, Lilium et Rosa, titles aligning uncannily with papal names, coats of arms, birthplaces, even personal histories. Not perfectly, but close enough to make coincidence uncomfortable, especially as the list approached its end. The final entry is different. No poetic flourish, no heraldic riddle, just a warning. A pope described as Petrus Romanus, ruling during the last persecution, while the city of Seven Hills suffers and judgment looms. After him, the list stops. Not concludes. Stops. Here is the detail most people avoid. By Malachi's own count, we are there. The current pontiff, Pope Francis, fits the terminal position numerically. Not symbolically, mathematically. There are no more mottos left to interpret. No room to extend the list without breaking its internal structure. The Vatican does not officially endorse the prophecy, nor does it denounce it. The text exists in an uncomfortable limbo, catalogued, translated, footnoted, and quietly set aside. Yet during moments of crisis, it resurfaces. Always does. Malachi never wrote about fire from the sky. He wrote about pressure, about a church stripped to its bones, about leadership tested beyond endurance. And the most disturbing part? He never gave a date. He didn't need to. The count does that for him. When numbers run out, time feels different. While Rome counted popes and Italy measured ages, the Eastern world listened to silence. Cosmas of Zeno did not live in a monastery in the familiar sense. He lived at the edge of things, on the margins of the Byzantine world, where stone cells clung to cliffs and the wind carried salt from distant seas. His days were ruled by fasting, prayer, and long stretches of stillness, broken only by the scratch of a reed pen against parchment. No audience, no disciples, only record. Cosmas wrote differently from Joachim and Malachi. No systems, no lists, no neat symbols. His texts read like intercepted transmissions, visions embedded in theological reflections, warnings folded into commentary. He describes a world where structures dissolve quietly before they collapse loudly, where authority fragments, where words lose weight, where faith becomes noise. And then he does something unexpected. He anchors his visions in time. Cosmas speaks of cycles tied to celestial movements, eclipses repeating, stars returning to familiar positions. He counts generations from the wounding of the Queen City, a phrase most scholars interpret as Constantinople's decline, long before its final fall. When later historians reconstruct his chronology, aligning his cycles with known astronomical events, the same narrow window appears. Mid-21st century. A brief span. Years that stand like a gate. Cosmas does not describe destruction as spectacle. He describes confusion, a world flooded with voices but starved of meaning. He writes of borders becoming porous, not just between nations, but between truth and imitation, between sacred and profane, between warning and entertainment. Most chilling is his insistence that people living through this time would not recognize it as prophetic fulfillment. They would call it coincidence, crisis, transition, anything but what it was. He warns that the danger is not terror, but normalization. Read that again. Not fear, not panic, normalization. Cosmas believed the great shift would be survivable only for those who noticed it early, while it still felt subtle, while it still felt deniable. You're used to thinking of apocalypse as noise and fire. Cosmas asks you to imagine something worse: silence, distraction, delay, and a door that closes not with a crash, but with a click. At some point, separate lines stop being separate. I remember the moment it happened for me. 3 desks, 3 translations, 3 timelines drawn in pencil, never meant to touch. Joachim's generational ladder, Malachi's papal count, Cosmas's celestial cycles. I overlaid them, not expecting alignment, but to expose contradiction. That's how coincidence usually breaks. It didn't. The margins overlapped first, then the centers. Dates blurred into ranges. Ranges collapsed into a corridor. And there it was again. The same narrow span. Not a single year, but a tightening window, roughly 2025 to 2027, appearing independently in 3 systems that had no reason to agree. Think about what has to go wrong for this to happen. Different centuries, different theological frameworks, different methods of measuring time. Joachim counted sacred history. Malachi counted men. Cosmas counted the sky. One used scripture, one used succession, one used cycles of light and shadow. And yet all 3 pointed toward a moment of compression, a threshold where the old order fails before the new one can stand. Statistically, this should not work. Interpretively, it should collapse under scrutiny. And still it holds. Each monk describes the same sensation from a different angle. Acceleration, pressure, overlap. A world running multiple systems at once, none of them stable. Joachim calls it a passage between ages. Malachi frames it as leadership stretched to breaking. Cosmas describes it as meaning dissolving faster than events themselves. Different words, same shape. This is where skeptics usually step in. They say humans are pattern-seeking, that we retrofit meaning, that we draw lines where none exist. And they're right, to a point, but pattern seeking does not explain independent convergence on a specific narrowing of time, especially when that narrowing coincides with observable stress fractures in politics, climate, belief systems, and institutions. The monks never promised certainty. They warned of alignment. And alignment is dangerous because it doesn't announce itself. It feels ordinary, busy, distracting. Life continues. Screens glow, markets open, headlines scroll. But beneath it all, three distant voices are saying the same thing. This is the part where everything overlaps. This is the part you don't get again. This is the part people later wish they had recognized. The lines have met, and from here on, they move together. Once you see the convergence, the present starts behaving differently. The monks spoke of transition, not destruction, but transition leaves fingerprints, and suddenly those fingerprints are everywhere. Systems that once moved slowly now lurch and accelerate. Institutions that claim permanence rewrite their own rules in real time. Crises no longer arrive one by one. They arrive stacked, overlapping, competing for attention. Joachim warned that authority would weaken before it visibly fell. Look around. Governments struggle to act decisively without fracturing. Laws multiply, yet trust evaporates. Power still exists, but it no longer convinces. It reacts. Malachi's final period was marked not by a single villain, but by institutional exhaustion, leadership under constant strain, moral language losing precision, faith turning inward or aggressive, the center failing to hold. That pattern is no longer theoretical, it's measurable. Church attendance collapses in one region, explodes in another, and fractures everywhere in between. Cosmas described normalization as the true danger. That is perhaps the most unsettling parallel of all. When floods are called the new normal, when war becomes background noise, when unprecedented events require their own recurring segments on the evening news. You're not meant to feel shock forever. You're meant to adapt, and adaptation can be lethal. The years between 2025 and 2027 now appear everywhere, not as prophecy, but as planning horizons, climate models, economic forecasts, defense strategies, infrastructure stress tests. The language is secular, technical, rational, but the timing is the same. This is how transition hides, not as revelation, as scheduling. None of this proves the monks were right, but it removes the comfort of dismissal. Because if they were wrong in a strangely coordinated way. And if they were right, even partially, then we are no longer reading history. We are standing inside it. You still wake up, still scroll, still plan for next year. So did the people Joachim described. So did those Malachi counted. So did the ones Cosmas warned would mistake warning for noise. The question is no longer what is happening. The question is simpler, more uncomfortable. At what point does transition stop being a theory and start being your environment? There is a moment in every prophecy where the scale changes. Until now, we've spoken about systems, churches, empires, cycles of history, abstract forces grinding against one another. That distance is comfortable. It allows you to observe without involvement. The monks knew this, and this is where their tone shifts. Joachim warned that the great passage would not feel global at first. It would feel personal. Your routines would begin to fail in small ways. Plans would shorten. Certainty would evaporate. Not all at once, but enough to unsettle you. enough to make you improvise your life instead of living it. Malachi's final period is not defined by catastrophe, but by pressure on individuals. Faith tested not by persecution, but by exhaustion. Too many signals, too many demands, too many crises asking for belief, loyalty, outrage, action simultaneously. He implied that people would retreat into tribes, narratives, identities, anything that reduced the noise. Cosmas goes further. He describes a narrowing of personal time, days that feel shorter, not because clocks change, but because attention fragments. You wake up already behind. You fall asleep with unfinished thoughts. Decisions feel heavier. Consequences feel faster. He writes that many will sense something is wrong, but will never name it, because naming it would require stopping. Now imagine yourself in the middle of this window, not as a spectator, as a participant. You still have responsibilities, people who depend on you, bills, messages, expectations. The world does not pause for transition. It accelerates through it. And that is the danger the monks circled without fully spelling out. If this is a passage, you don't cross it alone. You cross it carrying everything you already are. The question they leave you with is not mystical. It's practical. What do you hold on to when structures loosen? What do you discard when speed increases? And how much uncertainty can you carry before you change? This is no longer about 2025 or 2027 as dates on a calendar. It's about who you become while moving toward them. Every manuscript ends the same way, not with clarity, not with reassurance, with silence. Joachim stopped writing before he resolved the age of the Spirit. Malachi's list simply ends. No aftermath, no explanation, no instruction manual for survival. Cosmos fades into warning fragments, as if even language refused to go further. 3 different minds, 3 different centuries, all arriving at the same restraint. They show you the doorway. They never describe the room beyond it. That omission is not a flaw. It is the point. Prophecy, in their hands, was never about prediction. It was about recognition, about noticing when pressure becomes pattern, when coincidence becomes structure, when unprecedented starts repeating often enough to lose meaning. You are living in the overlap they described. Whether you believe the cause is divine, systemic, ecological, or human-made almost doesn't matter. The sensation is the same. Acceleration, fragility, compression, a sense that the old maps no longer match the terrain beneath your feet. The monks never demanded belief. They assumed skepticism. What they asked for, quietly, persistently, was attention. To patterns, to timing, to the cost of ignoring transitions until they harden into consequences. Some will say every age believes it is special, that every generation feels on the brink, and that is true. But not every age leaves 3 independent witnesses pointing to the same narrow gate. The years ahead will not announce themselves as fulfillment. They will arrive as schedules, updates, policies, crises, distractions, normal days, busy days, and somewhere inside them, choices will be made, not once, but repeatedly, that shape what comes after the passage. This is where the story ends, and where responsibility begins. If you feel the pressure they described, don't dismiss it. If you sense acceleration, don't numb it. Talk about it. Compare notes. Watch the patterns. Prepare, not for an ending, but for instability. Because if the monks were wrong, attention cost nothing. And if they were right, then silence is the most expensive choice of all.